And John of the Cross says, I saw the river over which every soul must pass to reach the kingdom of heaven. And the name of that river was suffering. And I saw the boat that carries souls across that river of suffering. And the name of that boat was love. And I think I would ask John of the Cross today to say, and the name of that boat was compassion. Because I really do think that that is what carries us across the river of suffering. Compassion is an awareness of suffering and the desire to alleviate that suffering. So it's being aware of suffering and then the desire to alleviate it. And if we can't alleviate that suffering, which is sometimes true, if we can't alleviate that suffering, then to be with it with loving kindness and with a loving sense of presence, a real comforting sense of presence. Marianne Radmacher, who's an artist, she has a lot of beautiful quotes that she puts on posters, and Marianne Radmacher writes, "That which masquerades as a trial to my spirit today will dress as a teacher of my life tomorrow." So we cannot see how we're going to get through that difficult time when we're in the midst of it. It's just impossible. We don't know what kind of growth is going to come to us until we look back on it. And so I really like that saying, but it's also, I have to be kind of careful with that about suffering can be our teacher. I remember I had someone come to me in spiritual direction, and she had been diagnosed just the week before with a tumor, cancerous tumor. And she said to me, I just can't figure out what this teaching is for me. And I said, let's just back up a little bit here. Right now, you need to be with this. You need to be with the shock of finding this out and what's that, and with all those emotions that go with it. You'll find in time what this is, what this means for your life, but you're not going to find it now. Now you need to comfort yourself and, do what you need to do. And so we need to be real careful, I think, with talking about, suffering can be our teacher. And I think never to romanticize suffering. God does not send suffering. Suffering happens because of our human condition. Whether it's a natural disaster, suffering happens because of how people relate to one another, what they do or do not do for one another. So that's my approach to suffering. And I also believe in this whole thing that God is a very compassionate God. In Henry Nouwen's book, Nouwen, McNeill, and Morrison, they describe the compassionate God in this way. God's compassion is total, absolute, unconditional, without reservation. And this is the description I love. God's compassion is the compassion of the one who keeps going to the most forgotten corners of the world and cannot rest as long as there are still human beings with tears in their eyes. Isn't that powerful? And so in suffering, to have the sense of that comforting God, that compassionate God, is so different than God is here testing me or, wanting me to have this for some reason that I can't understand. I think this was in Spirituality and Health. I just love this story. This was in last year's issue. And it's called A Zen Master's Guide to the Bible. This particular writer, Clark Strand, had been away from any kind of practice of religion for a long time. He had been brought up as a Christian, and he was practicing Zen Buddhism. And he and his family were on a plane. They were flying from Memphis someplace, and they were in the air, and the plane filled up with smoke. And, of course, you can imagine the panic that came on. And so they were telling all the passengers what to do, the flight attendants telling them they got to put their head down and so forth for a landing. And his little daughter, 6 years old next to him, turned to him and said, "Daddy, are we going to die?" And he said in that moment he realized how much children rely on their parents in a moment of crisis. And he didn't know what to say, and so he said he went inside and he looked for an answer. And he said an answer actually came, and he said it was just a little whisper, and it was only 4 words. And the words were, "I don't think so." And this is what he writes. "I don't think so wasn't an answer you'd have gotten from the God I grew up with, the one with an opinion on everything political and a punishment for every liberal act. That God was certain about everything. I'd run as far away from that God as I could get, which turned out to be a Buddhist monastery, and even that sometimes felt too close. But a God who admitted calmly, serenely even, that he didn't know for sure whether my family and I were going to die, that was another matter entirely. It gave me the feeling that we'd be taken care of either way, that in fact we couldn't lose as long as we surrendered fully to whatever came next. If God could relax long enough to stay open to what the next moment would bring, whether it brought the softest of landings or a ball of fiery shrapnel, then God willing, so could I. But if you go in the Gospels and you take and you read how Jesus was with people, not just what he taught, but how he was, you'll find the reflection of a very compassionate God there. Marcus Borg says that the key quality of Jesus is compassion, and it is. And he is very aware of suffering and is with people in their suffering.